So welcome everybody, and particularly Brad and Jeff, thank you so much for coming and attending. This is very exciting. And I think the topic is really timely. So I just jumped off another Zoom call. Hofstra is in the process of hiring a new president for fall 21. And I was on the call with the search firm and the board of trustees to talk about what traits the new leader of Hofstra is going to need, particularly as we navigate this very uncertain kind of time for higher education moving forward. So I think your presentation today is relevant, in all areas, private industry, higher ed, and so on. So we're going to start, I guess, with with an introduction from each of you, and then we'll move into the presentation. So. Who wants to get started, Brad or Jeff?
I'll jump in just because I talked first. Hey, good afternoon. So Brad Haime, and I work in executive education, HiPo development, performance management, exec coaching, Center of Excellence at Verizon in New Jersey. Spent about 10 years at Accenture doing basically the same kind of work in some process design, and also about 10 years at PepsiCo, I guess doing the same kind of work and a lot of work in the learning space as well. And I'm class of 96 with Jeff.
Yeah, so Brad
that was awkward to say.
Yeah, Brad, happy to be here, guys. Looking forward to today's discussion. So Brad and I, as he said, graduated in 96 together. Just a quick walkthrough career-wise. Upon graduation, I was working in the compensation department of a company called Polygram Records, who was actually a holding company for multiple record labels. I got involved in some HR technology projects at the time and went on to run HR technology for Ann Taylor, the women's retail company. At that time, there was a large explosion really in the HR technology space with companies like Oracle and SAP. Really rolling out large enterprise-wide platforms. And I eventually went to work for PricewaterhouseCoopers. So I went through their management consulting boot camp and spent about 5 years with PwC. At that time, it was around 2000, and obviously the dot-com issue hit all the markets, and companies' tech spending was dramatically reduced. So at that time, I took the opportunity to leave and start my own company, as companies were not willing to spend 8 figures on projects anymore, but they were very willing to spend 6 figures. So I ran that company for about 6 years, and then sold it to a New Jersey-based HR strategy firm. Worked there for a few years, then went on to take a position at American Express, where I ran HR technology for them for about 5 years, and now I'm currently at Citibank. So I run global HR technology for Citibank, along with all of their real estate technology, excuse me, as well as corporate communications. So that's a little background on me. Kirill, I think you're on mute.
I forgot that I was on mute. So I guess we're going to start with maybe Brad, would you like to start? And I know we talked a little bit about Verizon's response to the crisis, and what is the role of leadership? What are some of the events that took place?
Absolutely, and this is what I think about all day, every day at work. I'm sharing a screen now, and I'll have a couple of slides just to kind of help position visually some of the things that I'm thinking about as I look at Verizon's response, not just what the company has done, but why they've done it, and kind of position it in terms of what is it we would expect the best leaders to do, not just now, but coming out of the crisis. So a little bit, just when we talk about Verizon, right, just to kind of give you a sense of the scale and scope we're talking about. So we're talking about 140,000 employees crossing customers with almost 100 million connections. I'm sure a lot of you are customers as well. We're talking about almost 2,000 stores that cross 150 companies. And it was March 16th, like the rest of the world, there was a decision made that if you could work from home, get home. And within 1 week, 115,000 of us started working from home, with 3/4 of our stores closed. Just to kind of give you a sense of when we're talking about the size and scope of change, that's kind of what this company has had to deal with. This is a page that was shared with in our Q2 or Q1 earnings call earlier, as we shared with our biggest investors, how has Verizon responded to the crisis? It's not about all the words on the page, but the way our leaders think about this transcends the leadership models that we put in place and transcends all of our programming. It is in the fundamental of what's expected of every employee and leader at Verizon. So we think about, what do we have to do for our employees first and foremost, right? And in the crisis, it's how do we keep them safe? We think about our customers, right? We can't just close all our stores. It's not even about our profitability, but we are the lifeline for many of the country's first responders, nurses, doctors, right? How do we make sure we're there for them when they need us? How do we make sure that we can even have this Zoom call, right? How do we help our community or society, right? It's a $140 billion company. It is not about capitalism just making money anymore. We could talk about that philosophically, but our company's philosophy is we are there to also give back to society. So how are we responding in that aspect of the crisis? And then, of course, we do have shareholders we need to care for. How are we taking measures to protect ourselves? So our leaders at Verizon are trained and expected to think through these 4 lenses in any major decision and minor decision that they make. So the question, right, that we struggle with is, so how does a company of this size, this scale, turn on a dime in a matter of days? And what does a great leader do in a crisis? And how is that different than, frankly, what a great leader would have had to do a month and a half, well, now 2 months ago? So I wanted to just share a couple of thoughts on that, and then Jeff is going to share a little bit of perspective as well. But when I think about this, the first thing I think about is what a leader needs to do in this crisis is take care of herself or himself first, right? And that means building resilience. And resilience, when you get knocked down, you get back up. All right. But it's not that easy, right? It's making sure that before the crisis hits, you have the skills and the mental model to deal with it. It's taking care of yourself and knowing when I'm getting those body signals that I am stressed, when I'm getting those body signals that I am nervous, when I'm hearing something in my team that I need to react to, but I'm not yet ready to react, I need to take care of myself first as a leader. That's what the best leaders are doing right now in this crisis. The second thing that I've observed and have been studying is our best leaders are not using this as an opportunity to kind of crawl back into their shells, but they're using this as an opportunity to collaborate. They're using this as an opportunity to engage others who they would need insight from to create database decisions, to make sure that the work that they're doing is truly value add at this critical time, and to make sure that they're communicating with those who need to hear the messages most. One example, over on the right side, 12 p.m. every single day, and this is the first 12 o'clock webcast I'm missing. Our CEO, Hans, and our CHRO, Christy, communicate to all 140,000 of us from 12 to 12:30, and they actually open this message up to the world. So if you would imagine, we're going through this crisis where, we are all nervous. We are, they're worrying about how we're going to hit our revenue targets, among all those other things. Every single day, 12 to 12:30, they're sharing updates with the employees. They're talking about what the impact on employees has been. Another way that we're collaborating is Christy has opened a mailbox, Anybody in the company who has a question and sincerely needs help, shoot her an email. One of my part-time jobs every night, I have to go into that mailbox and answer these questions on behalf of Christy with caring and compassion. These are a couple of ways that our company is responding in terms of great leaders collaborating. Another thing that I see is I see great leaders responding with humanity, right? Being, if any of you have studied or seen any of Brené Brown's work around being vulnerable, the number one thing that a leader can do wrong. And I had a conversation the other day with, his name is Admiral Eric Olson. He is the admiral that trained the SEAL team that killed Osama bin Laden. He's the admiral that was in that room when they took that famous picture of Barack Obama watching the action on the TV screen. And I was talking with him about leadership in this crisis. And he said the number one thing that a leader can do wrong is pretend you have the answer when you don't, and make something up when you don't have the answer. You lose credibility, you're not seen as empathetic, and you're not seen as being someone who wants to take meaningful action. One quick example, over on the right side, it says People plus Work Connect. This is a solution that Accenture, Verizon, Lincoln Financial Insurance together to launch last week. This solution does not make Verizon money, nor does it make Accenture money. It is a way that when companies are laying off people, they can leverage this toolkit that we've put together to share. These are people and skills that are becoming available. Can you please go to this tool first, other companies, and identify, are there people here that you want to bring on before they have to go onto the unemployment line? This is leaders stepping up at a time when others are at the most vulnerable to create solutions that, frankly, they do not need to create. And I thought this is just a wonderful example that brings it to life. Two other quick things, and then I'll turn it over to Jeff, at least that are top of mind for me, guys. This is the time when the best leaders break orthodoxies. My entire company was built, and I probably shouldn't say this because we're recording it, but I'll say it anyway. We spent 20 years releasing new phones, amping up price a little bit, weighting down price a little bit based on what the market's demanding. You can make decisions and make a lot of money relatively easily. And a lot of orthodoxies about how decisions are made fell into place. The highest paid person in the room often gets to make the decision. Now, with everything thrown up in the air, what are some of the orthodoxies that just need to get put on the table and broken? It's no longer the highest paid person in the room that needs to get paid. Maybe it's the person closest to the data. Maybe it's the person closest to the customer, which in many cases is the customer service rep. How are we empowering them? This concept of breaking orthodoxies and using a language of curiosity with teams around what if we do something different? Why might we do something different? How might we approach this question differently is exactly what the best leaders are doing right now. That little screenshot on the right is from a program that we led right before the break, where we asked 300 leaders in a room to put up orthodoxies at Verizon that they need to see broken. And as you could see, we have some work cut out for us, but these leaders are stepping up and saying, this is what we need to do differently. I guess my last thought as we get into this is the best leaders focus more right now on motivating their teams versus micromanaging. I can't see my team members right now. They're all over the country. They're huddled in their homes. Many of them need to work off hours because they're dealing with teaching their kids during the day, and they have demands on them they never had in the past. It is very easy for me to micromanage and ask for more status reports and put more rules and processes in place. The best leaders are using this as an opportunity to experiment at new ways to create meaningful work. And that little graph on the right, I pulled it out of HBR the other day. It shows, so for people who are told to work from home and have no choice, and people who have a choice on where they can work, the left column is those who are not allowed to experiment and create solutions in a new way, what their engagement is, versus the columns on the right are people who are allowed to focus on their own, create their own solutions to major problems. You could see the comparison is just really stark. So the best leaders right now are the ones who are letting their teams run and giving them a little bit of latitude to kind of figure some stuff out on their own. So really that's, you know, some of my initial thoughts as I was kind of thinking about what am I seeing in the best leaders, both at Verizon and some of the best thought leaders in both industry and academia, and how they're reacting right now. I don't know. I see there's a few questions, and Jeff, you probably have some more insightful stuff to say than me.
Yeah, no, Brian, that was fantastic. You know, and as you were speaking, there's so many interesting parallels between the two organizations. Now, obviously, these organizations are in business to generate profit and return capital to their shareholders. But during this time, it was so interesting to see how that was the last thing that was being considered. If you think of Citibank, you know, we have so much responsibility to small businesses and small business owners to ensure that they have the capital to keep their businesses running, that was really such a driving force behind how do we keep our organization as productive and as business as usual as possible. So I'll give you a couple of examples that we did. So when the virus really first hit, obviously it hit in China. We have a huge facility in China, and that was kind of a testing ground for us for how are we going to move into this model if the virus starts making its way across the pond through Europe and into the United States. So we had our China facilities and really all of Asia move to a remote work environment. And just some things to consider. What we also did, we stopped flying internationally throughout Asia, eventually stopped flying internationally to any countries. And by March 15th, we had eliminated all domestic travel as well. So we saw such a significant impact coming that we started eliminating all travel really 2 weeks after our China and Asia facilities went working remote. What's really interesting from a statistic standpoint is on average, Citi had 15,000 employees working remote at any one time. Our networks had the capacity for double that. So if you think about it as an organization, right, you understand what some of your averages are, and those of you who are more interested from a statistics standpoint, right, and you start building out your continuity of business plans, assuming double your average as a worst case scenario. So here we are, we have capacity for 30,000 employees to work remotely. By the end of March, we had 150,000 employees working remote. So 5 times what our maximum capacity was. So what did we have to do? We had folks started working split shift. We had folks, we eliminated the use of video. We eliminated the use of screen sharing. We had folks only accessing email remotely, not logging into networks at different times. And what was so impressive was within 3 weeks after that date, Citi had the capacity to adhere to full business as usual processes, and we went back to just the way we were working before the virus. So if you think about how many companies were trying to get access, probably working aggressively with Verizon, we need more bandwidth, we need more hardware, we need the ability for our employees to work remote. The fact that we were able to stand that up within less than a month was really an incredible achievement from the organization. And I mentioned that and tie it back to what Brad was saying about leadership traits. Right, so this is now you have leaders that are running technology organizations, running procurement organizations, excuse me, running finance organizations that have to break down these silos and they have to work collaboratively and maybe put the success of their own organization to the side to ensure Citi as a whole is able to prosper. There's a great exercise that's done in a lot of team building exercises where each person gets a series of shapes in an envelope, and they're each asked to make a square. And you might have enough shapes to make your own square, but you have to actually trade with the people at your table to ensure the entire table can make a square themselves. And that's really how the table wins. And that concept of you have to give up your square so the entire table can succeed, right? That was a concept that is prominent throughout Citi's leadership standards and a great example of what was used to get us back to a business as usual state. So just a couple other statistics that I think is going to be interesting. We also built a lot of new tools during this time. So how are we tracking who is out of the office due to COVID, due to taking care of sick relatives, just out of the office because they have to take care of children that no longer are in school. So again, we were able to operate across silos to really quickly build and roll out tools that now we're able to track our entire population with the push of a button as far as who is out with the virus, who's been exposed to the virus, and we're using that to help us with our return to work policies on how and when we will let folks come back into the office. And I'll touch on that in a minute. One of the most impressive things for me that I think we're all going to see come out of this and will benefit all of you moving into the workforce is going to be dispelling the myth that people who work remote are not as productive as those in the office. And many of us have known this for years, but there's still a huge portion of corporate America that feels I need to see your butt in a chair in the office for me to know you're being productive. And I really think that when we see folks being productive outside of the office, companies are going to be much more willing to adopt that mindset moving forward. So far to date from a Citi perspective, and we just released our first quarter earnings, we have not seen an impact to productivity. I realize that we have a very small baseline of data to work with, but we are not seeing impact to productivity. And one other interesting thing, so Brad gave a lot of great examples on leadership traits. I'm going to give you a good example of a mistake that was made at Citi. So we were trying to figure out what employees were most critical that had to be in the office and which employees we could encourage and mandate to actually work remote. And our leaders went out to senior leaders of the organization and said, we need you to tag employees who are critical, and therefore those are the employees that are going to be allowed into offices. Now go tell a leader, look at your entire organization and tell me who's critical to the success of our teams, the success of our organization. There was so much emotion tied up in that word critical, and there were so many people coming back with that critical tag against their name. It was a wasted exercise, and it caused a huge amount of noise within the organization. Once we changed that tag and said, we're not going to use the term critical, we're going to use the term site dependent. So which one of your employees is site dependent to do their job? Well, that change in verbiage just eliminated all of the emotion, and it allowed us to get to a true understanding of who needed to be in our offices and who could work remotely. So a great example of just using the right words, and those of you interested in change management, it's a perfect example. Choosing the right words and the right verbiage can drive or dispel a significant amount of emotion and really clear out or cause a lot of noise in the overall decision-making process. So, as Brad said, right, a lot of leadership traits were so prominent during these last few months. Being calm and not frantic, being positive versus being an alarmist, right? Being proactive, as I said earlier, right? Looking what's the worst case scenario and let's start preparing for that now, as opposed to being reactive to these situations. And one of the items that I think is most critical is for an organization, let's start setting our strategy and action plan ourselves, and don't let other people dictate that to us. And I think that's so critical as we start moving forward, and we're even looking at what's our return to work policy, right? Let's start thinking about that and setting that now, so we have a straw man in place and we're able to react to what's going on in the external environment, and we're not using external environmental factors to really force us to start driving a development of the policy bed. So those are just a couple highlights from my side. Maybe I'll turn it over if there are any questions for either Brad or I, or that are on the chat currently.
Yeah, thanks guys, that was great. We do have a question from Michael. Michael, if you want to ask that question about high potential stuff, that'd be great.
Yeah, hi. Hey, Camilla. Hey, Brad.
How are you?
I'm great. Thanks. Hanging in there. Yeah, so I was mentioning that last week I was on a webinar with Bob Eichinger and Roger Pierman, and they were talking about, their work on, the traits and characteristics of high potentials within organizations. And actually crises like this, I think their quote was, never waste a good crisis to, develop your high potentials. And the way they laid out sort of the type of environment that a high potential thrives in is exactly this, right? It's a crisis where it's uncertain, it's ambiguous, they have to break rules, the orthodoxies, as you put them, Brad, to get things done fast. And, they advocated for, C-suites to basically elevate and tap into their high potential pipelines during times like this. And so my question, curious to both of you, is, have you seen that happening at Citi and at Verizon recently, where the C-suite is reaching down to the organization and elevating next level leaders to help shepherd the organization through some of this crisis?
Yes, I'll take a first swing at this one, Brad, and then hand it over to you. So I'll explain it from two perspectives that we've seen. So to your point, the C-suite reaches down, one or two downs, right, and appointed who are going to be the leaders of these various work streams. So some work streams, I'll give you an example where, right, infrastructure and technology, how are those changing? Our policies, how are those changing? Travel and client interaction, how is that changing, right? And they appointed, right, folks who are obviously on succession plans for future leaders of the organization. And those folks are the ones leading these work streams now, and they're doing a phenomenal job. So at the more junior levels of the organization, what I'm seeing is a much more organic growth for these hypers. So you could tell these high potentials, they're raising their hand, they're reaching out, they're saying, I want to get more involved. I have some bandwidth. What could I do to help? So it's great to see that those ranks of your future high potentials and future leaders who are organically identifying themselves in the lower levels of the organization, plus, as you said, the C-suite reaching down one or two levels to tag, right, who are on succession plans to run critical work streams to get us through the remainder of the crisis.
A couple of observations. Am I on? Oh, I'm unmuted. Thanks. I just had a couple of observations and builds on Jeff, your point. So big picture, this crisis is fundamentally going to change the conversation about succession planning when we have it in a few months. And it's fundamentally changing the way we have to think about even performance management for not just high posts, but everybody coming up. Like, how do you hold somebody accountable for objectives when 10,000 people in our company are not able to go to their retail locations to do their job right now? That comment, though, Mike, and by the way, it is so good to see you, on never waste a good crisis. Those same 10,000 people, generally more junior in the organization, pulling on Jeff's point, our most senior leaders said, wait a minute, what can we do to quickly make sure these folks feel valued and useful in the organization? Pulled some of our best leaders together and figured out a way to, in a matter of, I'm going to say 3 weeks, created a program to not just reskill these 10,000 people to move from call center, to move from retail to call center, but rolled out this process, rolled out the training, and executed it. To make that happen, we needed to pull some of the best leaders to come up with that creative thinking. Longer term, it's changing the way we're thinking about top talent programs, not just the way we deliver it, but what we're going to be considering as stretch assignments in that context. Anyway, just a few builds on Jeff's point.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? So one of the things that I've been hearing is that, as organizations are navigating this crisis, they're putting, programs that are not deemed necessary on hold. So for example, talent assessment maybe, or leadership development. So it's one thing to have the hypos identified, but do you think this is a good time to really be trying to identify hypos? So who are the people that are rising to the challenge? And what are you seeing in terms of current leadership assessment programs where the focus is on now looking at your leadership pipeline to see who's rising? So more in terms of assessment rather than utilization.
Right. I at least from my experience, it's a little bit early to say, all right, there are certain tools that we're using that maybe we've under leveraged in the past and we can get more out of going forward. In terms of a personality assessment, for example, I can say though that I am 100% confident that coming out of this crisis, there are going to be certain characteristics of folks that have risen as leaders in the organization that we are going to want to replicate in others. And we are going to be looking for what is the right tool to help us do that in a more consistent and effective way. Just to map back to my point earlier, the leader of the past at Verizon is really good at command and control. We have found if we thought it was different when we had to figure out a way to implement 5G and monetize that globally, we have now doubled down on that when we think about what a great leader is going to do going forward. And any way that we can bottle that to figure it out, there's going to be a lot more demand for it than there was, at least at my company, 6 months ago.
Yeah, I'll give a little bit more tactical answer just so you kind of get a view into what's happening. So from what we consider our executive management team, which is our CEO and his one downs, right, we are keeping all processes as we would in a non-crisis year, let's say. So we have a talent wall, succession planning, mid-year reviews, all of those activities are staying BAU. For the rest of the organization, what we've decided is we're going to push out, right, our talent review process by 60 days to give folks a bit more time to adjust to the crisis, to focus on tasks at hand, and then do our talent planning. We're doing away with our mid-year calibration sessions that we normally do, as well as our mid-year assessments. We'll still have discussions with our employees, right? But as far as a formal calibration, we won't do it mid-year. And we're going to pull forward our year-end activities, which usually occur in October, November. We'll pull those forward and do those in September. So just trying to give managers a little bit more bandwidth, right? Keep the focus on the executive management team and the succession planning that we need there, especially to report out to regulators, but also give some relief to the other levels of the organization so they could focus on, obviously, the deliverables that they have throughout the year.
Great, thanks guys. We have a question from Song about supportive leadership.
Yeah, Brad, hi, nice to see you. I'm very interested in you mentioning that Verizon team has focused heavily on supportive leadership. There are so many other type of leaderships, but it seems like the supportive leadership plays a big role here. So my question is that it's practical that leaders are acting supportive and empathetic during this crisis. What do you see as the most important benefit of having a supportive leader? So there are employee outcomes, productivity, performance, morale, well-being, work-family balance. What would be the most critical thing here?
In my opinion is informed by some of the stuff that I read a few years ago from Google's Project Aristotle. And it has nothing to do with this crisis, but I think that this crisis makes that work even more important. So if you haven't taken a look at it, it basically was the project that created the concept of psychological safety. So if you have a supportive leader, and that doesn't mean, you know, patting somebody on the back and saying everything is okay, right? That is a leader who is open to constructive feedback, and that is a leader that finds different ways to allow each team member to bring to the table who they are, right? Inclusiveness. The value of doing that, which I think is what your question is the same now as it was 6 months and 6 years ago, which is a more engaged employee who's going to be more creative, more willing to go the extra mile. I think that stays now, and this has been an opportunity for leaders to show that side of them, or to double down on potentially bad behaviors. And when we come out of the crisis, that leader is going to have to pay for it in terms of having a team that just is not engaged, but yet no longer feeling in a crisis, and maybe they'll look elsewhere.
Thank you very much.
It's a really cool piece of work. If you all want to read it, it's available online. Just Google it. That project formed the background, by the way, of a managerial effectiveness index that was launched at PepsiCo, I want to say, 7-10 years ago, redone probably 3 years ago, as well as one we're implementing now at Verizon, because it is so important that leaders are held accountable to the right behaviors, which include psychological safety.
So we have a question from Nicole about balancing short-term and long-term strategies. Nicole, do you want to ask that question?
Sure. Hi, guys. I'm sorry. My video is not working. Otherwise, I would be showing my face. Hi, Brad. Hi, Jeff. So, yeah, my question, and I asked this kind of from looking at two things. One is kind of the mindset of a leader during this time, and also from just a structural change kind of perspective in the organization. And, as we go through this crisis, I can imagine that, a lot of short-term changes need to be made kind of right now in order to kind of just triage and address the current needs. But then I also know that, when we go back, it's not going to be exactly the way it was. There will be this new normal, and things, will be changing, within the organization and industry and world at large. So I'm just curious how, your respective organizations are balancing like a short-term focus and then also having that long-term focus so you can stay proactive for the changes that will come. And especially in times of this uncertainty when we really don't know how things are going to play out and what things are going to look like down the road. And just, from a leadership mindset perspective and maybe just how your organizations are dealing with that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nicole. So I'll give you a great quote by our president, who's really leading a lot of this work for Citi. And she said, "We were forced into this situation and we had to rush to make a lot of very quick decisions. We are going to be very thoughtful and planful as we come out of this situation. And we are going to take our time. We're going to base our decisions on data." And it was incredible to hear her say this because we were all rushed into this situation. And so even if it happened over a month, it was still an incredible rush. But we don't have to rush back from this situation. We can be planful. We can set our strategies. We can take guidance from governments, whether it be the CDC or the WHO. Those of us who are working in New York, we have to understand what the culture of life is going to be like on public transportation. So our leadership is taking a very long and planful way of getting us back to whatever is considered normal, which we know will not look anything like it did 6 months ago. So to your point, the short-term strategies are you're usually forced into because of extenuating circumstances, but we're not forced out of it. So we're going to take a very planful look at what these strategies are.
I don't have any builds on Jeff on what you shared around long-term, different company and industry, but exact same perspective from our senior leaders. I have one thought that just came to mind on short-term. So one of the cool things about my job is I get to talk to some of the thought leaders in this space and just get their perspective for things I'm doing. And I talked to this one guy, Joe Pfeiffer, late last week. So if you don't know who Joe Pfeiffer is, he was the New York Fire Department battalion chief who was the first on the scene in 9/11, and he was the last to leave. So he lost, obviously, lots of people, including his brother. He just retired from the fire department 2 years ago, and he has become an expert, as you would imagine, on crisis management. And I asked him, in the immediate term, when you are dealing with the issue, when you are in that moment, what goes through your head, like that short term? And he said that the most important thing that he did, and he continues to do as he works through crisis, is he creates a deliberate calm. So when you're thinking about those short-term strategies that need to be created, what he said he does as a leader is what are all the things that are going on around me right now? I shut them out like a racehorse wearing a blinder. And what do I absolutely need to get done at that moment? And I execute flawlessly against it. And I create a deliberate calm because those around me also will follow my lead. That really stuck with me. And that's the only real build, Jeff, that I have on your thought, kind of that short term, got to create the deliberate calm and focus on what needs to be focused on first.
So one of the things that I've been impressed with, listening to the two of you, and also just, the the news that I'm reading is how we've all adjusted as quickly as we have had to because we've had no choice. So you've probably seen a lot of things that have been done right in your organizations. But what are some of the things that maybe leaders could have done differently? Jeff alluded to, one example with the language that was used and the adjustment that was made. But if something's not working, what are the best characteristics for a leader to say that something didn't work and that they're going to try something else?
So I'll give you another example. Sure, I'll give you another example of no good deed goes unpunished, right? So there's such a move to be a more empathetic leader during these times, right? Brad touched on it earlier, and empathy comes in different forms for everyone, but it was almost too prescribed in the beginning. So are you having one-to-ones? Get everybody on a video, check in with everyone and ask them if they're okay. And that's great for the majority of people, but it doesn't work for everyone. And not everyone wants to be on video, as we can see here today, right? And not everyone wants to talk about how they're feeling. And maybe some people do have issues with relatives or friends, loss of jobs, health issues, and they don't want to share that with a large audience. Maybe they don't even want to share that one-on-one. So in a rush to move to this empathetic leader model, I think we tackled the majority, but didn't take into account some of the minority as well, and didn't give them an opportunity or not force them into this empathetic model that we were trying to achieve here. So I think getting the feedback from and keeping your ears open as to what is working for most doesn't necessarily work for all, and having alternatives. I'm seeing that now that we're a couple weeks later as a much better model than as we started out.
I'm keenly aware of a leader being asked to lead in a not just a non-natural way, but in a way that's just not who he or she is. And I've been giving a lot of thought to the introverted leader, right? So somebody who typically is wonderful at their job and wonderful leading people, but just building on Jeff, on your point, a lot of people might not want to be on video, might not want to reach out. There's a lot of leaders out there, that's just not their style, right? Hey, everybody, tell me how your day is going. Let's have a let's all be human together call at 5 o'clock. It's just not a lot of leader style. And it comes across when that might happen as being ingenuine. So, I think the way I would answer your question, Dr. Shahani, is leaders need to find their own personal style and not take what the book tells them to do or the hot article that got forwarded around on, how to lead a team that's working remote, but take it as advice and try different and new things and constantly ask your team what's working and what's not working. That's just my build.
No, that's great. For those of you who don't know, that Dr. Shahani is an inside joke. Brad and Jeff, so that's why I chuckled at that moment. But Kevin, does anybody else have any other questions?
I do. I got a question I'd like to ask if there's the chance. Both you guys have these wealth of knowledge about how organizations are handling this and how just industries are handling this in general that I know our students appreciate. And one of the questions that students keep asking me, and my guess is that you have a lot more insight than I do, is what kind of spaces, what kind of areas are going to be the greatest opportunities for them entering into the field? Where do you see expansion happening in the term of IO? Where do you see things closing up? What would you recommend that they gain a little extra insight or knowledge into to help position themselves to get a good foothold in kind of their careers as they're starting off in the field in the next couple of years?
Technology. No, I'm only kidding. Couple of areas here that I think is critical for folks to walk into an organization having these skills, right? You have to have the ability to link value to what an organization is doing. So what do I mean by that? I mean, you will be faced with working on multiple projects. You will come up with projects of your own. You will invariably want to pitch an idea to someone. You have to have the ability to link that to the value that the organization will get. So what is that value? Is there a financial value? Is it an improved user experience? Is it compliance with regulatory? There's value across the board. You have to be able to link your actions with some resulting value. That is one of the most critical skills you will have to have. It is a great skill to have to understand financial management as well. And I know we don't focus on it a lot in the IO program. I myself, someone asked me, what would you do differently if you had the chance to do it again? I would focus much more on finance from an educational standpoint as well. You have to be able to understand finances. It's how all companies run. They're the ones funding your job. They're the ones funding these programs, new technology, new initiatives, new assessments. You have to have an underlying knowledge of finance. You have to be able to link actions to the value an organization is going to get. So I know I didn't answer your question specifically as far as what jobs do I think are going to explode. I don't have the ability to say we're specifically going to need 5 more XYZs next month, more than we do now. But you have to be able to walk into any role with some of these basic skills.
I could not agree more. My biggest regret, and it just came easier to Jeff than me, but I was dumb enough to follow his lead. I didn't pay enough attention in my psych stats class. And Jeff, he's got all these great grades, and I just should have paid more attention. I think analytics and understanding and being able to communicate the insight that numbers are giving to both your leader and your clients is, I think, the most important skill, regardless of where you wind up focusing your degree. I also think, and I don't know if it's any different now, right? I don't think the analytics comment is any different than it would have been 6 months ago. I think it's really important to not pigeonhole oneself very early. If you listen to Jeff's career path, it was varied. Right. I remember, Jeff, when you had that internship at the record company, and I had my internship at UBS at the time. You know, I loved consulting and PepsiCo, and I worked in insurance, and all those different experiences helped make me a more well-rounded professional, able to advise on different topics, and able to speak the language of business in a way that my client is going to understand it more effectively, and you know, hit the point that Jeff is making, which is you've got to meet your client where they are. And if you're proposing a new solution, a new assessment, a new training program, or trying to design something along that nature, asking questions and sharing a recommendation in a language they will understand. The only way to do that is understanding the language of business and having those experiences for yourself.
So I guess I'll just follow up with for both of you. What did you do specifically, both of you, to learn some of those besides the varied career experiences, so that, you know, you got your psychology training, but you didn't get finance, you didn't get the business language. How did you get up to speed in those areas?
Go ahead, Brad. You take this one first.
I'll jump in first. The best thing that happened to me was I turned down the offer at UBS to work there in May of '96, so that I could pursue a career in consulting. I went to work at Accenture. And the reason why that was the best thing, at the time I thought it was to get a couple more bucks and to travel a little bit, which was a lot of fun. But every 6 months to a year, I was put in a situation where I was scared out of my mind that I didn't know what I was doing, right? I had to work at Bank of America and implement a audit model and present that. I remember this as a new consultant to the head of audit. I didn't know anything about audit. I knew enough to ask questions. I knew enough to research different approaches. And I feigned enough confidence to get a couple of analysts to lead me. by doing that and by working in consulting and getting those different experiences, I was exposed to change management practices, being able to read a balance sheet and understand the business impact of what some of the challenges my clients were explaining to me. I learned consultative partnering techniques, and I also honed my craft, right? So the things that I had to be good at. And at the time that was building online and classroom learning, leadership development programs, understanding assessments, building change management programs. But the short answer is I put myself in a situation where every 6 months to a year, I had to try something new, and I wasn't naturally good at it. And I still do that now. I don't think I've ever been in a role more than 2 years.
A great answer. So when you start working, you are going to find out two things very quickly. A, what you're passionate about, and B, what you're weak in. Find a mentor for both of those areas, because that mentor is going to help you grow your passion that could turn into a long-term career for you. And your other mentor is going to help strengthen those weak spots, which you are going to need regardless of what role you move into. And as Brad said, multiple roles over your career. And you're going to find out those two things very quickly. And those things will change over time also. Find, and I'm using the term mentor just because I don't have a better term, but find a mentor to help you in both of those areas.
Thank you.
What Jeff said, his answer is better than mine. Like I think that's spot on.
So I know that we have 3 minutes before Jeff has to jump onto his other call. So is there any last questions before?
Como, it looks like Allison started writing one. Allison, do you have a question you want to ask?
No.
No, Allison Wright, you have a question to ask?
Okay.
So let me just close in with a positive comment from my side, because I'm sure folks in your position are concerned what's going on with the workforce, maybe missing graduation, what can I expect? So just a couple of positive comments on our side. We have not stopped hiring. We have not slowed down hiring at all, okay? We might have changed our interview practices from face-to-face to video. And we're certainly not flying people in for interviews, but we have not slowed down our hiring practices at all. Also, folks that were going to do an internship with us this summer, just to give you a comparison, our internship program over this summer is 10 weeks. We've truncated that program down to 5 weeks. We are still paying them for the full 10 weeks, and every single person who goes through that internship program this summer is getting a full-time offer coming out of that program, which is not standard for us. So companies are doing the right thing to take care of folks that are coming into their organization. They're looking for new talent. They're looking for folks in your position. I don't want you to see what's happening now and be discouraged by it. You should be encouraged by it. There's a plethora of hiring and opportunities out there. Go take advantage of them.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Brad, any closing?
Yeah, our intern program has been made digital for the summer. So our interns are not going to be on campus live, but we didn't cancel the program either. And I'm excited about that. So my team rethought how we're going to engage our interns to make sure it's a meaningful experience for them. So that's pretty cool. I guess, and everyone here on the call is different ages, right? So I have some folks on my team, somebody just closed on a house, right? I have some folks on my team who are worried about what's the long-term impact if we don't get back to work in the next few weeks. We have lived through some serious crises before, right? 9/11 was a really big deal that became a real big recession after that. 2008, like Jeff stands before you right now with a really strong balance sheet with an amazing bank. I was smart enough in 2008 to buy a few shares of Citibank at like $5. These are strong companies with good leaders with long-term outlooks. My advice would be, especially for those graduating, this is short-term stuff, and we are a very resilient economy, and you are resilient future leaders. It might take a little bit longer to find what you want, but focus your energy on the companies now that are using this crisis as an opportunity to position themselves better for the future. I'm proud to say I think I'm part of one of those, and I know Jeff is part of one of those for sure.
Okay, thank you. I see. I saw Jeff's chat. Jeff has to leave, but thank both of you for doing the session, and thank you to all of you that logged in to listen. And
Great.
you know, wish you all the best. Thanks.
Absolutely. Best of luck. Thanks, guys. Feel free to reach out on
Absolute
LinkedIn
pleasure.
if you want to contact at all. I'm sure Brad and I will be more than happy to contact with you guys.
For sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you both.
Yeah.